We're here at Université de Montréal at the International Conference Street Politics in the Age of Austerity, and joining me is Dr. Marcel Sangsari of McGill University, Professor of Sociology, who's studying comparative social movements and will soon be doing a study on the movements in France and Spain. At the conference today, Dr. Ancelovici presented on the Occupy Montreal movements that took place in October in 2011. If you can share with us a little bit about the background and origins of the Occupy Montreal movement.
Well, it began in the wake of Occupy Wall Street that took place, that began on September 17, but even before that, it was the Indignados in Spain, also called Movement May 15 in Spain, and it began so, as the name indicates, on May 15 after March ended up on the occupation of the public square in downtown Madrid, the Puerta del Sol. And that spread to many cities in Spain. And they occupied public squares between 2, 3, 4, sometimes 6 weeks. And then that spread to neighborhoods, and it became basically neighborhood assemblies. In Madrid, there were more than 150 neighborhood assemblies active in the summer of 2011. During the summer, these activists were organizing at the neighborhood level. That spread to Greece because of the crisis, the European crisis affecting Greece. In July, the magazine Adbuster published a call to occupy Wall Street with this picture of the bull and the woman dancing on the bull, the Wall Street bull, on September 17th. So we had the beginning of Occupy Wall Street. And the Spanish activists had called also for a global day of action on October 15, 2011. So after Occupy Wall Street begins on September 17, you have October 15, and then you have this global day of action, where basically you have occupations of public squares in more than 1,000 cities in 80 countries throughout the world. Some of those occupations lasted just for a day or 2 days, and some lasted several weeks and sometimes 2 or 3 months, depending on the local context.
In your talk, you described something called the politics of horizontalism. What does this mean in terms of the Occupy Montreal protests, and how is this kind of the model for their movement?
Well, all those protests that I just mentioned in Spain, in Greece, in the US, in Canada, they vary depending on the local context. Different issues, different economic realities. The crisis is not the same in Montreal as it is in Spain or Greece or the US. What they do have in common, though, is the organizational form. And that's what I call horizontalism. I mean, it's not my invention. It's a word that is being used by activists and other scholars. And it's basically about refusal of hierarchies, so demanding full equality, participation, participatory decision-making process based on consensus. You have an autonomy from political parties. You basically use the assembly, for example, as a free space, a space of empowerment, a space of recognition. And the claim is that that's real democracy, and many groups actually called real democracy or democracia real in Spain. And the claim is that that's an alternative to representative democracy based on parties and elections, and that this way of organizing politics and of doing politics is richer, is more substantial, and empowers citizens as opposed to just voting every 4 years, for example.
Who were the protesters involved in Occupy Montreal? Was it and what were their concerns, their goals? What were they hoping to achieve out of it? Were they a homogeneous group or heterogeneous?
I would say it was incredibly heterogeneous. I mean, you had old activists, new activists, you had just bystanders. I mean, you had people that had never spoken in public, you had students, unemployed people, so really a great variety of people, even though it was mainly, I would say, male men were slightly a majority, but still in terms of political opinions and experiences and backgrounds, it was pretty varied. Now, they did not have a single demand, and that was, I think, they were criticized for that. I would say they just had too many demands. It was ranging from, increasing taxes on corporations, reforming fiscal policy, tightening regulations on finance because of the crisis, regulating also the environment or climate change. I mean, tons of issues. And obviously reforming institutions to make them more democratic. I would say if there's something that kind of summarizes, again, the main demand it goes back to horizontalism, which is basically this idea that the occupation and participation in assemblies, so the horizontal way of organizing, that's both the means and the end. It's really the idea that we live today the ideal society that we would like to see, on a bigger scale.
Has the protesters' demands they're translated into any action on the part of the governmental authorities?
No, the government did not respond in any specific way, at least not in the US, as far as I know, not in Canada. Maybe in Europe there were some changes, slight changes in terms of laws or budgets, but austerity continues in both Spain and Greece, and so on. So far it's not affecting government policy. It's not also having a substantial impact on elections. Actually, in Spain, people called for abstention, which meant that right-wing parties won the election. So far, it's not changed in a mainstream institutional politics. What you have, however, is symbolic gestures. Giving new names to public squares and people deliberating, making public statements. People also, meeting new activists, ties being built, strong ties, trust being built, and that basically turns the assemblies in all these occupations into sites of contention, sites of coalition building, of coordination that will feed mobilization processes beyond and after the occupation.
And the type of social movement in public squares going to be, is it going to stay, or is this a one-time thing?
That's very difficult to say. I think the first time, it wasn't the first time I had an occupation, but on this scale, I think it was the first time in Spain, in Greece, it was the first time it was so massive. And in the US and in Canada, it was definitely the first time it was so massive in so many cities at the same time. So you had the effect of surprise, and people's expectations were not that high, so they were just expecting, a weekend. Then it lasted, like in Montreal, 6 weeks. So people were actually surprised and very happy about it. I think if it were to happen again, it would be very different because people's expectations will be different. They would expect it to last, and if it doesn't, they would be disappointed. And also the police will, I think, intervene quickly, and they will not wait for so many weeks, so the dynamic will be completely different. Potentially, you would have confrontation between occupiers and the police from the very beginning, the police not tolerating the occupation, and that would be the end of it. And then people will need to move on and come up with new tactics and new modes of organizing.
Very interesting. We look forward to reading more of your research on these movements. Thank you so much, Dr. Ancelovici.